The sound came first, a metallic scraping that cut through the howling wind like a blade. Then silence. Then another scrape, deliberate and rhythmic like claws against steel. Darren Holt stopped walking. His breath formed small clouds in the frozen air as he listened, head tilted, eyes scanning the twisted landscape around him. Nothing moved. The sound didn't come again. He was probably hearing things. After 3 hours of picking through this graveyard of metal and dreams, his mind was starting to play tricks on him. The outer scrapyards of Tarnus V did that to people, made them see shadows where there were none, hear voices in the wind. But something felt different today. Wrong. She had been locked in a cage with no name, no clothes, no hope. Not until one human stopped to wipe away her tears. The outer scrapyards of Tarnus V stretched endlessly under a sick orange sky. This was a dead zone where no law reached, where no lights shone, where no one came to fix what was broken. The old refineries had shut down 10 years ago, leaving behind a wasteland of twisted metal and collapsed machinery. What remained was a graveyard of broken dreams and abandoned equipment. The air here was poison. It stank of acid frost and burnt plastic, thick with the smell of years of chemical spills and reactor leaks. Every breath burned slightly, even through the filters. The ground shifted constantly, under footloose metal panels crunching over, layers of compacted waste and debris. Every step was dangerous. One wrong move could send you tumbling into a pit of sharp metal or toxic sludge. Darren moved carefully through this maze of destruction. His boots had special grips for traction. But even so, he had to watch every step. He tested each surface, checking angles and support before trusting his full weight to anything at 38 years old. Darren was an ex-Navy systems technician who now worked alone. He had a low-tier salvage permit that let him pick through places like this, searching for valuable scraps that others had missed or been too afraid to find. He wasn't here because he wanted to be. He was here because nobody else would take jobs in the unregulated zones, and he needed the money. Tarnus V had become his fallback plan after leaving the Navy. He didn't like to talk about why he'd left the service. It wasn't a court-martial or anything dramatic, just what he called a quiet exit, a voluntary discharge with a sealed personnel file. No medals, no ceremonies, just a handshake and a closed door. Now he made his living hunting through collapsed buildings for old heat cores and data rods, selling them to whoever would pay. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a criminal. He was just a man trying to stay one step ahead of his debts. The scanner on his left wrist had been quiet for the past hour. No radiation spikes, no live signals, nothing worth his time. But then it beeped. Twice a sound that made his heart skip. Metal density consistent with power casing. Something valuable might be nearby. He changed direction, climbing carefully over the hull of a collapsed transport ship. The metal groaned under his weight, but it held. From this higher position, he could see further across the scrapyard. That's when he spotted something that made him freeze below him. Wedged between a toppled drone hauler and a half-melted cooling coil, something caught the weak sunlight. A glint of metal that didn't belong. It was angular, rectangular, and clearly made by human hands, not cargo, not part of a vehicle. A cage. Darren's blood went cold. He narrowed his eyes, trying to get a better look. The cage was built from stripped stasis bars, the kind used in medical equipment, but someone had reinforced it with crude iron welding. It looked like animal transport equipment that had been modified for a different purpose. The welding marks were fresh. Within the last few months, someone had used plasma tools to seal this thing shut. There were burn marks around a heavy lock. But the cage was still sealed tight, and inside something moved. Darren's hand went instinctively to the plasma torch clipped to his belt. He climbed down slowly, his eyes never leaving the cage. His boots hit the ground with soft crunches on the debris below. As he got closer, what he saw made him stop breathing. Curled in the corner of the cage was a woman. She was completely naked, her skin blue with cold and covered in filth. She was so thin that her ribs showed clearly through her skin. Her hair was long and matted, hanging in dirty tangles around her face. Her arms were wrapped tightly around. Her knees and her chin was buried down like she was trying to fold herself into nothing. A single strip of thermal cloth hung from her wrist, filthy and torn. It looked like it had once been tied to the bars of the cage, but now it was just a reminder of how little she had been given. No clothes, no name, no hope. Just bruises and silence left in a cage like unwanted garbage. She looked up at the sound of his approach. Her eyes were wide and pale blue with faint rings of violet around the edges. They were glossy with fear and dehydration, but they weren't empty. She was still aware, still alive, still fighting to exist. Her lips moved and a sound came out so quiet he almost missed it. Her voice was cracked and dry, like someone who hadn't had water in days. "Don't leave me in the dark again." The words hit Darren like a physical blow. He dropped to one knee just outside the bars, his mind racing. He scanned the area quickly, no signs of other people. No heat trails, no motion sensors. The wind howled through the stacks of junked metal behind him, but here, next to the cage, it felt suddenly too quiet. He knew what he was looking at. His time in the outer colonies had taught him to recognize the signs. She was Verlina fertility cast, engineered. For beauty and other purposes he didn't want to think about. Her blue skin and violet eyes were genetic markers that made her valuable to certain kinds of people. But that didn't make this better. It made it worse. No one legal would keep someone like this caged on Tarnus V. This wasn't detention or punishment. This was disposal. Someone had used her up and thrown her away. Assuming no one would ever look twice at this forgotten corner of the scrapyard, she looked ready to collapse. Her breathing was shallow and her eyes kept drifting closed before, snapping open again, like she was fighting to stay conscious. Darren unclipped his plasma torch and activated it with a short hiss. The blue flame cast dancing shadows on the cage bars. The woman flinched at the sound, pressing herself further into the corner. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, keeping his voice calm and steady. She didn't answer. She just watched as he touched the torch to the heavy lock. The metal began to glow red hot, and within seconds, the lock mechanism gave way with a loud click. Darren pulled the cage door open slowly. The hinges creaked from rust and neglect. The woman tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her. She had been in that cage for so long that her muscles had weakened. She collapsed forward, and Darren caught her before she could hit the ground. Her skin was shockingly cold, like touching ice. It was covered in scratches, bruises, and grime from her imprisonment. She weighed almost nothing, far less than any healthy adult should. He supported her head with one hand and her back with the other, holding her carefully against his chest. She didn't resist his touch, but she didn't cling to him either. She just sagged in his arms like someone too exhausted to feel anything, more than the basic need to survive. Darren moved quickly now. He carried her across the scrapyard in long, careful strides, keeping to the shadows between the piles of wreckage. His ship, a modified hauler called the Skimmer, was parked under a rusted lift crane where it would be hidden from any sky drones that might be watching. He opened the rear ramp manually and stepped inside, letting the pressure seal lock behind them. Inside the ship, the air was warm and recycled, smelling faintly of ozone and machine lubricant. The lights were dim but steady. He laid her gently on a padded storage crate that he sometimes used as a makeshift bed. Then he took off his jacket and wrapped it around her body, covering her from shoulders to knees. Her eyes flickered open. She blinked slowly, looking around the small cabin with confusion rather than panic. "Heat's coming up," he said softly. "You're safe now." He went to his supply locker and pulled out a protein ration pack. He heated it in the small food processor and brought it to her. She stared at it for a long moment, like she didn't remember what food was supposed to look like. Then she took It with trembling hands. She ate like someone who hadn't seen real food in weeks. Cautious at first, taking small bites and chewing slowly. Then, as her body remembered what it was like to be fed, she ate more desperately. She finished the entire pack without stopping. He offered her a hydration capsule next. She took it, but drank more slowly this time, as if she was learning to trust that there would be more when she needed it. Gradually, her hands stopped shaking. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Why? Darren didn't have an easy answer. He looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't just a survivor of something terrible. She wasn't just discarded property that someone had thrown away. She was a person, cold, starving, and humiliated, but still fighting to exist, still holding on to her humanity. No one else was going to help, he said finally. I couldn't just walk away. She nodded slightly, her eyes still fixed on his face. After a few more minutes of silence, she whispered, They called me Lot 12. That's what they put on the tag they hung around my neck. Darren sat back, letting her words hang in the air between them. The casual cruelty of treating a person to a number, a piece of inventory, made his stomach turn. Do you remember your real name? He asked quietly. Her gaze drifted down. She closed her eyes and was quiet for so long that he thought she wasn't going to answer. Not yet, she said finally. That's all right, he said. You're not a number here. You're not a lot or a piece of cargo. You're a person, and you can take as much time as you need to remember who you are. She pulled his jacket tighter around herself like a shield against the memories. Her breathing steadied, and for the first time since he'd found her, her shoulders relaxed slightly. Darren didn't press her with more questions. He stayed close within reach if she needed help, but not looming over her or making her feel trapped. That night, she slept fitfully. Every time the ship's hull creaked from thermal expansion or the metal settled, she would jolt awake with a gasp. But each time, Darren was there. He sat nearby, monitoring the ship's systems and checking the sensors, keeping his voice low and his movements careful whenever she stirred. He didn't touch her again after that first rescue. He just stayed, a steady presence in the dark, sealed, quiet of the ship's cabin. And slowly, hour by hour, the cage began to feel like a memory. Not erased, it would never be erased. Not forgotten, she would carry those scars forever, but escaped, left behind. Tomorrow, they would leave Tarnus V and its scrapyards behind. For now, she had warmth, a locked door between her and the outside world, and a man who saw her as more than salvage. That was the first step. By morning, the ship's heating system had brought the cabin to a comfortable temperature. The hauler's engines hummed quietly with contained energy, ready for departure. Through the grime-coated viewport, Tarnus V's sky showed the same dull orange color it always did, like a wound that never healed. Darren hadn't slept. He'd spent the night sitting on the edge of a storage crate, watching the woman breathe. Her sleep had become deeper and more peaceful as the hours passed. She still clutched his jacket tightly around her shoulders, but the desperate grip had relaxed into something more like comfort. He'd spent some time reviewing the footage on his wrist recorder from the previous day. Mostly it was just terrain scans and ambient readings, but there was that one moment when he'd cracked open the cage. Her face when she'd looked up at him. Her voice when she'd whispered, "Don't leave me in the dark again." It wasn't just fear he'd heard in those words, it was memory. Someone had trained her to expect darkness, to expect abandonment. He didn't know exactly what they'd done to her, but he knew enough. Someone had locked her up, used her, and then thrown her away like garbage, assuming no one would ever care enough to look twice. If someone like him hadn't happened to pass through that section of the scrapyard, maybe no one ever would have. She stirred then, her eyes blinking open slowly. Her first movements were careful and cautious, her body still adjusting to the luxury of warmth and safety. She shifted upright on the makeshift bed and looked around the cabin, not with panic this time, but with confusion. She seemed unsettled by the absence of pain, by the lack of restraints or expected punishment. Her body was still braced for hurt that didn't come. "You're safe," Darren said, keeping his voice calm and steady. "Still on the ship. You slept almost 9 hours." Her hands instinctively pulled the jacket higher on her chest. Then she looked. Adam directly really looked at him for the first time. "You stayed," she said. It wasn't a question, but there was wonder in her voice. "I said I would." "What is this place?" "Storage hauler. It used to be a Navy shuttle, but I retrofitted it for salvage work. It's mine." He gestured around the small but functional cabin. "The name's Darren Holt, and you're aboard the skimmer." She repeated the name softly, testing how it sounded. "Skimmer." He nodded. "We'll be leaving this moon in about 20 minutes. I know a quiet refueling station 2 sectors out. No questions asked, no records kept." She looked down at her hands, then back up at him. Can I go with you?" "You don't need to ask," he said. "You already are. You're part of the crew now if you want to be." That silenced her. She glanced toward the exit hatch, almost like she expected someone to burst through it at any moment and drag her back to the cage. Her next words came out quieter, more hesitant. "I don't remember how long I was in there." Darren shifted slightly, but let her talk. Sometimes people needed to say things out loud before they could start to heal from them. "I remember the cage," she continued. "I remember being pulled out sometimes. Bright lights. Cold examination rooms. People who looked at me like I was a piece of equipment. Then back into the cage." She paused, her voice growing even quieter. "Always back to the cage." Darren's jaw tightened. "They sold you." She nodded slowly. "The last buyer never even asked if I could speak. I don't think he cared." Darren stood and walked to a storage console across the cabin. From one of the drawers, he pulled out a thermal bodysuit that he'd pieced together from salvaged materials. It was designed for insulation and flexibility, not much to look at, but it would provide coverage and warmth. He walked back and knelt beside the makeshift bed, offering the suit to her. "It's clean," he said. "Yours, if you want it." She looked at the garment for several long seconds, then back at his face. "You're not asking for anything in return?" "No. You're not going to ... She couldn't finish the sentence, but he understood. "I'm not going to touch you," he said firmly. "Not unless you ask me to. And even then, only if you really want me to, not because you think you have to." That made her blink in surprise. Was clearly not the answer she'd expected. He didn't push her to decide. She reached out slowly and took the suit, turning slightly away from him before beginning to put it on. Her movements were awkward, like her muscles had forgotten what it felt like to dress herself. When she pulled the material over her shoulders, she let out a small, sharp breath. It was the first time in months, maybe years, that she'd covered herself with something of her own choice. Darren turned away to give her privacy until she tapped the metal edge of the storage crate. "I'm ready." When he looked back, the transformation was remarkable. The suit hugged her figure closely, the insulation material clinging to her arms and legs. But she stood straighter now, more alert. The tattoo marking above her left hip was hidden now. Her hair was still tangled and dirty, but her eyes looked clearer, more present, better. He asked. She nodded, running her hands down the front of the suit like she couldn't quite believe it was real. Darren gestured toward the pilot's seat. "We should get moving, ready to leave this place behind." She looked toward the viewport where the orange sky of Tarnus V stretched endlessly over the scrapyards. Then she looked back at him and nodded. "Sun Guild figures out I took something they think they own." Her brow furrowed. "You're not worried about them. I am. Beauty've been hunted before you powered up the ship." The hauler lifted from a scrapyard without drawing alarms, had jammed all beacon signals. Routine for illegal zones, the engines hummed low. Astley broke free from the dense atmosphere. She stared through the viewport, eyes wide as the wasteland after V shrank behind them. "How long will I stay with you?" she asked. Darren didn't look. "Away from the console as long as you want." A pause. "I don't have a name," she said. "Not really. You'll remember it." When you're ready, what if I don't? He looked at her then we choose a new one, she turned back to Thesters. The silence between them was no longer empty in the storage cabin. Chef owned a cloth scrap part of an old emergency banner and carefully folded it into a makeshift head wrap. Her hands moved, slowly, deliberately. Each motion said, I'm still here. I choose what I wear. Now that night, she asked him a question without preamble. Why didn't you report me? Most would. Darren leaned back in the seat, arms crossed. Because I don't work for them, and because you're not athing to be reported. She hesitated, then gave a small nod later as the ship floated in drift mode near a dead moon. She curled up in the same bunk, but this time she left the jacket folded neatly at the corner. She didn't hide. She slept facing the door, and Darren, for the first time in years, let himself rest. He didn't chain the hatch. He didn't lock the... Nay, he didn't feel the need to keep one eye open, because the moment she stepped on Taith, Skimmer 12 something had shifted. He wasn't running salvage anymore. He was saving something that mattered to Skimmer. 12 drifted quietly in low orbit around a dead satellite moon, Calegraven. 6, a place forgotten even by smugglers. Its crust was dry, brittle, shattered by old mining operations that had long since gone silent. It made a perfect hiding spot. Inside, the ship lights were low. The hum of systems echoed through the walls like a distant engine room. Lullaby Darren sat at the diagnostics panel running a systems check. His fingers moved across the interface with quiet efficiency. Behind him, movement. She had emerged from the sleeping area. Makeshift stimsuit clung tightly to her form, but she walked with more stability today, less hesitation. Her hair was now brushed roughly, but with care, done with one off the emergency kits he'd set aside unasked. She hadn't needed to ask. She, without speaking, looked over his shoulder. Her voice came softly. Water. You scanning fuel decay rate, jump? Drive readiness. If we get traced, we'll need to move fast. She stood quietly for a second. Are they looking for me? Yes, Hesad, but not with much effort. Girls like you, they treat as property. If you're missing, they assume you broke Godscrapped. That's how they think, so they won't chase us. They might not because he are. Few because they don't like losing what they think they own. She looked down at her hands, paused, then asked what she hadn't dared the last 2 days. What happens if they find me? Darren didn't answer immediately. He tapped the screen once, saved the data, then turned it in his chair to face her fully. If they come, we fight, or we run, but they're not taking you back. She searched his face as if testing for sincerity. She found no hesitation. They're no lie. She sat down across from him. I think I remember something she said. Her voice was stronger, now controlled. He waited a nominate. Mine, a voice called it, say, LRA? I think it was meant for me. Dare nodded. It fits. You, she repeated it again, softer, say. LRA. He didn't smile. He didn't make a big moment. He just said, then that's who you are. She leaned back slightly. First time. She looked like someone beginning to return to herself, not all at once, not fully, but a step. He stood, walked to the storage cabinet, pulled out a fresh sink cloth towel and a ration pack. You should wash. I'll show you the sonic chamber. It's not luxury, but it works. She followed him through the narrow corridor. He opened a stall, handed her the towel and controls, then stepped back. You're safe. Take your time. Door locks from the inside. She hesitated at the threshold, looked at him one last time. You won't look? No, she nodded and entered the door, sealed with a hiss. Darren stepped back into the common area, sat down, exhaled. Part of him expected to hear her cry, to hear her panic, but he didn't. What he heard instead, faintly through the thin alloy walls, was the sound of running water and silence. Helen forward, elbows on his knees, the question gnawed at the edge of his mind. What now? He didn't plan for this, had never planned for anything beyond survival routine trade the Navy had taught him. To follow protocol, to hold line, and after his discharge, he'd avoided every entanglement, every cause. Now a cause was living in a ship when the bathroom door finally hissed open. He looked up. Syrah stepped out, wrapped in the towel, her damp hair slicked back over her shoulders. Her eyes looked clearer, her posture firmer. I left the stem suit inside. She said it needs repair. I'll patch it. She moved past him, sat in the co-pilot's seat. Her skin was still flushed from the warmth of the wash, but her voice was neutral now, almost calm. You didn't ask what they did to Madarin, didn't move. You don't owe me that, I want to say. Just once out loud, Hel looked at her, then I'll listen. She stared ahead out the viewport, the broken curve of Yorvin. 6 cast deep shadows across space. She didn't cry, her voice didn't shake. She just told a plane they used me for testing hormonal sequencing breeding. Compatibility, nothing invasive at first, but later it changed. I thought he punished me. Then I was sold to someone else. He didn't want children, he wanted obedience. I stayed in a cage after that. Darren didn't speak, he didn't interrupt. When she finished, she didn't look at him, she just folded her hands. I thought I would die there, that no one would. Care that even if I escaped, I'd still be worthless? You're not. You said, his tone steady. I know that now. She replied later, after she dressed in Onuf, the patch thermal cloaks he gave her. She asked to help him with a repair. The ship's lower vents were blocked from heat cycling. He guided her through the tools, showed her how to reconnect the intake hoses. She learned quickly. That night they ate across from each other, quiet. Not tense, just quiet. At one point asked, what did you do before? This systems tech, 12 years Navy Corps, did my job. Then I left because one day I saw something wrong and I didn't stop it. She looked at him, but you stopped for me. He nodded. Yeah, I did. She didn't ask for more before sleep. She paused at the doorway to the sleeping area, then said, thank you for calling me by a name. Kay answered without turning around. Thank you for remembering it. The door closed behind her, and for the first time in years, Darren felt the weight in his chest shift, not disappear, not heal, but move. She wasn't healed either, but she was alive, and tomorrow they'd both Takinather step towards something they hadn't dared imagine, a future. The warning came during mid-cycle diagnostics. Darren had set the skimmer 12 into a low-energy drift path across the shadow. Off Jorvin 6, using the moon's gravity to mask their signal while rerouting power to recharge. The jump core, it was routine, safe, calculated. Then the proximity sensor blinked red. He sat up straight, pulled the data overlay. A ship had entered the outer range, small, fast, untagged, not a mining vessel, no Biakano, declared route. It was skimming low across the moon's surface, quiet. Sharper, poseful, say Elara. He called already at the helm. Get strapped in now. She emerged from the sleeping bay, still tugging her patched thermal cloak over one shoulder. What is it? Someone scanning? No ID. Broadcast, they're looking for something. She stopped. You think it's them? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Darren shut down the nav lights and redirected power to propulsion, keeping the ship in passive mode. They couldn't outrun a tracker ship in raw speed, but he could hide if he had time. The stealth modulator was crude, but functional, built from an old recon drone he'd stripped minutes ago. He activated it, then looked at her. They haven't locked onto us yet, but if they do, we can't stay here. She stood still, gripping the edge of the console, her jaw tight. I don't want to go back in a cage. You won't. He pulled up the emergency nav chart. There was a blind corridor between Joran 6 and its twin moon Trassel Minor, a belt of ice debris and magnetic field noise. Dangerous, unmapped, but perfect for hiding. He set the course and throttled up. The ship hummed smooth at first, then juddered as it hit atmosphere resistance bond. Then the scanner showed the unknown vessel adjusting trajectory faster, now tracking confirmed. They saw us. He muttered. Sarah sat in the co-pilot seat, tense but composed, thesters blurred as the ship pushed through the upper debris ring. Darren shifted power to shields. Ice fragments glanced off the hull with sharp thuds. The controls bucked. In his hands, he looked at her just once. Her hand was braced against the console, her knuckles white, but her breathing was steady. I can help, said. You are, he replied. The tracker ship didn't fire. Not yet. That was worse. Sight meant they were trying to disable, not destroy. Slavers didn't want corpses. They want a product. Darren rerouted the engine heat into the secondary exhaust vent, a trick that could fool thermal sensors for a few minutes. The skimmer ducked low, diving under a dense cluster Of rotating debris, then the ping stop pod, no signal, no trace, gone. They held position silent, waiting 2 minutes passed. 5 Seer didn't speak. She just stared at the viewport lips. Presagether. Finally, Darren exhaled. I think we lost them, she. Didn't relax, not yet, but her shoulders dropped. Just slightly, he turned the ship toward Trassel Miner's shadow and locked in a cold rift orbit. No engines, no signature. It was only when everything was silent Hagen that she spoke. They knew where to. Look, he looked at her. You think it was the last buyer? No, she said quietly, Theons. Before him, the ones who kept records. They marked me with a sigil tattoo. That's how they track lineage and fertility. But they also embed tags. She pulled the edge of her suit down just enough to expose the lower curve off her abdomen just above the hip bone. There, under the skin, a faint raised node, almost invisible. Darren leaned in jaw tight. You knew I suspected. Why didn't you say anything? Her voice didn't waver because I wasn't sure you'd still want me aboard. Darren stood, slowly walked to the med station, pulled the surgical scanner from the wall and set it to surface depth. He knelt beside her, lie back, said, We're taking it out now. She hesitated just for a second, then followed the instruction. Without resistance, the scanner hummed, highlighting the embedded chip. He sterilized the extractor and pressed it. To her skin, she flinched more from memory than pain. The chip came free with a short bus. He dropped it into a containment vial, sealed it and placed it into the ship's waste incinerator. Gonish sat up slowly, holding her side. He gave her water, then sat beside Hernither. Of them spoke after a moment. She said, You didn't hesitate, not once. Her voice dropped. Most would. I'm not most. She turned her head slightly to face him. We. Are you doing this? He thought about it, then answered, Simply because someone should have done it for my sister Anthe. Didn't that silence her, but her hand moved, hesitant, trembling, and touched his, not out of gratitude, not out of fear, but because it felt like the right moment to close the distance. He didn't pull away. She leaned her head against his shoulder, eyes closed. They sat like that for a long time, no words, just breathing, just the low hum of the ship as it drifted in silence between stars and threats in the frozen dark. When they finally moved it, wasn't because they had to. It was because the worst had passed for now, and what remained between them was no longer just survival, it was choice. The skimmer 12 drifted in dead space for 2 days, hidden in the shadow of Trassel Minor. No pings, no signals, no movement across the long-range sensors. Darren kept them in cold sleep orbit systems, minimal heat emissions buried beneath static from the ice field. It was the safest they'd been since the scrapyard inside. Time slowed, not in the physical sense, but in the way it settled between two people who had stopped running. Darren ran ship check Severy. Few hours the systems held, fuel remained steady. He didn't need to speak unless something changed. He didn't mind the silence. Syrah moved through the ship now with familiarity. She no longer hesitated before opening doors or entering shared space. She helped prepare meals, repaired a coolant line after watching Darren do it once, and she kept brushing her hair, something he noticed only because it had become smooth. Again falling clean past her shoulders like a curtain of black silk. On the third evening, she found him in the storage bay, sorting through scrap insulation, foam, and carbon tape. He was working under a dim light, stripped down to his vest, arms marked with old burns and fresh bruises from their recent evasive maneuvers. I want to fix my suit, she said, holding the damaged stem layer. I want to do it myself. He nodded, said nothing, handed Hearth kit. They worked side by side for nearly an hour, sharing a square of floor surrounded by crates and unbolted panels. She didn't ask for help, and he didn't offer less. She needed a tool at one point. She paused, fingers pressing into fabric. Does this place feel different to you? He looked over the ship. She shook her head. No, I mean being here, not moving, not hiding, just existing. Darren sat back, stretched his legs. It's quiet. I like quiet, she said. Then after a breath, she added, I didn't know if I would. She continued, stitching eyes on her work. Do you think people can forget what they've been trained to expect? Hadn't answer immediately. I think they can learn something new, he said, if they're given time and safety. Syrah nodded. You never looked at me the way they did. He didn't look at her now either because I see a person, not a product. That silence returned again. Solid, full of meaning. She finished patching the final seam, tested the elasticity, then leaned against the crate beside him. I want to tell you something again. I don't want you to tell me it's okay. Darren turned his head slightly. I'm still afraid. She said, every morning I wake up and think the door will be locked again every time you're quiet. I think I did something wrong. She wasn't crying, she wasn't trembling, she was just telling. The truth. He nodded. Steph, I'll keep showing you you're safe until it sticks. I wanted to stick Shettern to him. Now, fully her eyes were calm, but searching. I want to choose something. She said, not because I have to, because I can, he said, nothing watching her. Closely, Sierra leaned forward slowly. There was no hesitation in her body. Now only care, only intention. Her hand touched his arm, then his chest, and Wench leaned in further. Her forehead touched his. He breathed in deeply. Hishin stayed at his sides. Tense, not out of resistance, but restraint, not because I didn't want her, because he did. And he didn't want to be one more person who took something without permission. You didn't owe me this, he whispered. I know. She said, that's why I'm offering. He kissed her not with hunger, but with reverence. His hand rose to her cheek, warm, solid, her fingers curled in his, shirt holding him. Closed, their bodies moved slowly, carefully, like learning a language without words when he lifted her into his lap. She didn't flinch when she undid the clasps of her cloak. She did it herself, and when he touched her skin, he did so with a kind of restraint that made her tremble, not from fear, but from being seen. They made love quietly in the soft heat of the storage bay floor, where insulation foam still lace-scattered around them like cast-off armor. Every movement was mutual, every rhythmic, every moment earned afterward. She lay against his chest, fingers drawing small shapes on the curve of his shoulder. No one ever asked what I wanted, she said. You don't have to answer Tonyon again. He told her, not even me. She tilted her head, kissed the sedie of his neck, and said, that's why I trust you. Later, they didn't talk much. They didn't need to. They ate together, cleaned up the tools, and folded her repaired suit neatly beside the sleeping bay. That night, she didn't close the door behind her, and in the middle of the night she came back to him. No fear in her step, no shimmy in her voice. Just a quiet request. Can I sleep next to you tonight? He moved over without a word, lifted the thermal blanket, and welcomed her in the stars. Outside didn't blink, the systems didn't fail, no alarm sounded for the first time in either of them. Dreamed of cages. 3 days later, the skimmer 12 received a transmission Darren hadn't expected and didn't want. It was a bounce signal, distorted and low-band, piggybacking on a dead satellite array near the center drift. No ID. Header, just a string off numbers and a voice fragment buried in static. Lot designations confirmed. Relocation manifest transit hub. Active. Adarn froze mid-step. He replayed it 3 times, ran it through the scrubber, boosted clarity. The signal was old, maybe 2 weeks, but the coordinates were relearned. The message was clear. Someone was still moving girls like Sarah, a holding station. Possibly a market node still operational. He didn't tell her right away. She found him at the console, hunched forward, jaw tight, eyes locked to the screen. He didn't hear her come in until her hand rested gently on his shoulder. What is it? He turned. Thy display off too late. I heard something she said. He looked up at her, then made a choice. No lies. I intercepted a transmission. It came from the drift sector east of Varnal Outpost, a relay point. They're still moving people, ones like you. She didn't blink. How many? I'd know. What do they do there? I'm guessing intake, short-term holding before? Redistribution. She stepped back. And you were going to go alone? I was thinking about it. No, she said. Her voice was clear, unshaking. You were going to leave me behind. Darren stood. Not because I don't trust you, because it's dangerous. I know. It's danger, she snapped. I've lived in it longer than you've known me, and not going to sit on this ship while someone else waits in a cage. He stared at her. This wasn't the woman from the cage anymore. This wasn't the girl who whispered for warmth. I need you to bezier, he said, not out of guilt, not because you think you have to pay something back. I'm sure she said because yet has to stop with me. He looked down once. Hands on his hips, jaw clenched, then her nodded by nightfall, the ship was in motion. The skimmer 12 left trestle shadow and made for the unregistered drift lane. Darren routed power to calm scramblers and weapons. Makeshift, but functional, Sarah checked. Their Medkitsamo clips and 2 stunners she'd never touched until... Now, he showed her how to fire one. She didn't miss the target evidence when they reached the coordinates. The station came into view, an old industrial dock wedged into a half-broken asteroid shell. Its external lights were off, minimal emissions invisible to most. Scans, but not to Darren's tools. They approached in silence. Docking manual Leith airlock groaned open inside. The air was cold and dry. Metal corridor stretched in multiple directions, each lined with surveillance lenses, most broken, but cameras weren't what he was worried about. They moved together. Sailors' steps were soundless focus. A first door they opened led to a holding room. Empty, abandoned crates stacked in the corners, most labeled with biometric tags. A set of cuffs bolted dento the wall. Sarah didn't flinch. They pressed deeper on the second floor, past a broken containment gate. They found them 3 girls. Young, malnourished, 2 asleep, 1 awake and staring at the wall, all wearing ID tags like the one Sross to bear. She knelt down. Slowly spoke softly. "It's okay. You're not property." Vagor didn't react. Darren kept watch at the door when footsteps echoed down the hole. He raised a stunner. Heart rate steady. A man entered the corridor, mid-40s, civilian clothing, no weapons visible. He looked at Darren, then past him. His eyes widened. "You brought one off them." He said, "You brought her back." Darren fired once. The stun bolt dropped a net. Mid-sentence, they moved fast. After that, Zero tore the tags off each girl herself. Her hands didn't shake when one of them cried. She held her when Theater stirred. She spoke low but firm. Darren loaded them into the emergency pod in the hangar, a tight fit but safe. "I can route this to a border patrol station," he said. "They'll get medical care, real papers. I have a contact." Sura looked back at the station one last time, then she reached in her own belt, pulled out the vial, the one with her tracking chip inside. She crushed it beneath her boot. "You said it had to be burned." She whispered. He understood. With a hesitation, he opened the auxiliary. Fuel valve dropped a flare stick into the leaking compartment and hit the Rimatethi. Watched from orbit as the station went up. Silent, brilliant, clean inside skimmer. The rescued girls slept in the rear compartment, wrapped in blankets. Of Sarah stood at the viewport, arms crossed, jaw firm. Darren stepped beside her. "You okay?" She looked at him. "No, but I'm free." He placed his hand gently on her back. She didn't move away. "You saved them," he said. "We did." Then, softly, "and on go home now, wherever that is." He turned to face her. "Then let's find one." Her hand found his, no hesitation this time, and together they left the wreckage behind. Green Moon was nameless. It didn't appear on any standard charts. No mining claims, no habitation zones, just a breathable atmosphere, stable gravity. And now open land to vanish for good. Darren found it by accident, an old survey ping buried in his Navy archivist. Never followed up. That made it perfect. The skimmer 12 touched down on a flat shelf of stone flanked by mossy cliffs and wide plains streaked with patches of bluegrass. The air smelled like damp leaves and sun-warm soil. No machine homino alarms, just wind-clean real sail. Stepped out of the ship first. She wore a long desert cloak they'd salvaged weeks ago, now cleaned, tailored, and clasped with a metal pin. Darren had fixed himself beneath it. The stitched stim suit fit her body like a second skin, but it was the way she stood, shoulders back, chin high, that made the difference. She walked to the edge of shallow ridge and looked out. No fences, no walls, no containment field, just open sky. Darren followed. His jacket was slung over one's holder, boots dusted with landing soot. He stopped beside her, squinting against pale sunlight. His body still ached from the last fight, but he hadn't felt this clear in years. "Feels different." Hesed quietly. "It's not silent," Sierra replied. "It's quiet." He glanced over. She was barefoot, her toes dug into the moss. Her eyes glinted. "We can build something here," she said. "Not a shelter, a home." Dare nodded. "We'll need a generator, a water rig, perimeter cams." We'll need time, she said. We have it. Later. He unpacked the emergency prefab unit and began laying out the basics fuel cell cum relay filtration mesh. She didn't stand back, she helped by and Downthy. Had a roof, 3 walls, and a temporary heat grid inside. It was still rough but warm. She found the old compass necklace tucked beneath his shirt. She didn't ask about it, just touched it once. I want to plant something. She said he went to wake up and see it grow. Darren didn't speak for a moment, then he reached into his bag and pulled out Asmel pouch of dormant seed pods, survivor flora from his Navy supply kit meant for harsh worlds. Try these. He said there. Stubborn like you, she smiled, faint but real. That night they didn't make love because of pain or relief. They didn't seek each other out in desperation. It happened slowly, naturally, a touch, a glance. A shared warmth beneath a salvaged thermal sheet, they Kiesedender flickering battery lantern. Like clothes, half shed skin against skin, no tension, no shame. Just a need to be with no watching eyes, no names burned into flesh. No debt. When he touched her body, guided his hands when she moved over him. He whispered her name once, Lore Everett. Say in the morning he woke first, she was already outside kneeling in the moss. Her cloak hung from her shoulders and her hair was tied. Back Shahad dug a small trench with her bare hands. She planted the fir seeds when he approached. She looked up. I want to stay here, she said. We will. I want to grow old. Here we can. She stood, took his hand, brought it to her belly. I don't know yet, she whispered, but I think I might be. And if I am, I want this child to be born, Ina. Place that isn't about fear, Darren. Didn't say anything he didn't need to hedge, wrapped his arms around her and held her there, anchored present. Riel no one chased them. Now no one controlled their future. The cage was gone, the names he'd been given, Lot 12, the traitor tech, the broken woman, the discarded manmient. Nothing anymore, only this. Did she stood beside him, not behind, not beneath, beside. And when they turned to walk back toward the small home they had started to build, their hands remained clasped, never let go the green. Moon had settled into their bones. The days passed quietly now, not with urgency but with rhythm. Darren and Syrah had established a routine. Mornings began with field checks and maintenance, afternoons with expansion walls, reinforced solar grids. Tallied a new filtration unit, Carvidinto. The slope behind their shelter evenings belonged to themselves. The prefab shelter had transformed panels from the skimmer 12 now. Reinforced the roof, fins circulated clean, warmed. Air, a sleeping space, kitchen corner, and a water station all fit within the modest interior. But it was the little things that made it. There's cloth wall hanging, sails stitched by hand, a table built from scavenged metal beams, a single flower blooming in a glass jar above the window. They no longer spoke in short phrases or cautious tones. Their conversations had deepened, slow, full of space, and Sherrod thought Sierra spent more time outside each day. The small field she cleared was no, a grid of low-growing greens adapted to the soil with Darren's help. Theplins were hardy, some refused to die even when she forgot to water them. I like them, she said once. They're stubborn. So are you, he answered. She grinned. That's how I made it out. It was saw a windless morning, 2 weeks after they burned the outpost that she sat with Darren beneath a low awning and took his hand in both of hers. I'm pregnant, she said, quiet but sure. He didn't freeze, she didn't panic. He looked at her and his first words were, are you afraid? Yes, she said, but not like before. He squeezed her fingers. Do you want this? She nodded on Swift. Yes, I do. Darren had never pictured himself as a father, not of Tathwar, not after the silence of space and the endless drift from one broken station to another, but looking at her, certainty in her eyes, the peace in her voice. He didn't see a burden. He saw a future. The next day he began expanding the shelter by hand, cut new beams, routed energy for a second room, built stronger supports for weatherproofings. Watched him from the garden bed, arms around her middle. I'm not fragile, she reminded him. I know, he said, but you'd serve protection anyway. She cooked more and now learned how to use the old heat coil unit without burning the bottom off pan. One evening, as they sat by the solar lamp eating stew and laughing, Vera failed attempt at flatbread. She suddenly leaned against him and whispered, I still wake up Samanis and expect to be locked in. He turned to her slowly, but I never feel it for long. She said, because I always find you next to me. That night they lay in the dark, her body pressed close to his, her palm resting low on Herbally. His arm was wrapped around her back, his breathing steady, no words were spoken, but everything that needed to be said lived in that silence. In the weeks that followed, they repaired more than machinery, they repaired themselves. Darren began smiling more. He laughed without hesitation, he kissed her in the Gordon without needing a reason. Sierra hummed. When she worked, she began writing Gagan, scratching notes on salvage tablet glass, sketching out what she wanted their home to become. She'd already picked a name, but hadn't told him yet. She was waiting until it felt right. One morning, after light rain, she stood barefoot in the garden soil and called to him through the open door, "Come here." He stepped out, wiping grease from his hands. She pointed to a green chut breaking through the soil that one wasn't supposed to grow. She said it was dead, it was in the wrong place, and it still found a way up. He didn't speak, he just came beside her and looked down at the stubborn sprout. Like us. She said. He slid an arm around her waist. She leaned into him, soft and warm, and for a long time they stood there, not watching for threats, not remembering pain, just breathing together. It was not a perfect world, but it was theirs, and nothing will take it from them.